The Drake and Childish Gambino beef is deeper than you think. With the release of Bando Stone and the New World, not many people were expecting Gambino to throw shots at Drake. However, it appears as though Gambino did on the track Yoshinoya.
I put your boy in the seat.
A track that many people have interpreted to be a diss at Drake, which to many people it might seem like Childish Gambino is just being another rapper to jump on the hate bandwagon for Drake, but the truth is that this beef was something that has been brewing since the very beginning of Childish Gambino's career. And to understand what I mean, let's go back to the beginning. In 2009, Drake became a star in hip-hop. Despite what history would say about a Canadian actor turned rapper, Drake had defied the odds and became hip-hop's golden boy. One of those rappers that would take hip-hop into the next generation. And in that very same year of 2009, a show by the name of Community would premiere. And amongst the many notable names among the cast, a young actor by the name of Donald Glover would make a name for himself. As a standout in the show, Glover garnered an audience who loved him for his acting and personality outside of the show. However, it wasn't until 2011 that Donald Glover would make his debut in hip-hop with the release of Camp.
Okay, it's Childish Gambino, homegirl, drop it like the nasty.
The album received mixed reactions to say the least, but if there was one thing that the release of the record brought was comparisons between Glover, who now went by Childish Gambino, and the only other actor turned rapper in hip-hop, Drake. Though stylistically, Gambino and Drake weren't necessarily the same, the two did share a couple of things in common. Most obviously, Gambino and Drake were both actors who then became rappers. Additionally, they were both rappers who weren't afraid to sing, which is normal now, but a decade and a half ago, it was still kind of rare. And last but not least, something that the two had in common was how much people would question their blackness. Something that still happens till this day and something that definitely matters. However, if you were to ask Donald Glover what the main difference between Drake and Childish Gambino was, then he would reply by saying something along the lines of, Drake's a cool kid and I'm more of a geek.
Not cool. Like, I really honestly believe this. Like, I'm not cool to pull that shit off. Like, if you ever see me with a cigar in my mouth, it'll be the stupidest looking shit ever.
But it's worth noting that Gambino didn't always think that was the case.
Because when I first heard it, I was like, oh yeah, this dude's talking about like the shit I relate with. But like the stuff he raps about now and stuff like that, it's like, that's not me. Because I'm not cool.
Something that will definitely matter later, but keep it in mind. Another thing you should keep in mind is that you should subscribe to the channel because I'm cool. You're probably cool too if you're watching this video. Cool people subscribe, but yeah. Though Drake wouldn't speak on Childish Gambino for a long time after that, Gambino would often get questions about Drake, and as such, he would big him up.
Drake, I like Drake a lot. I like Drake's a homie though. Like I know him. But I would tell him to face, I think he's a really great artist. Like, I appreciate, I know there's a lot of controversy, but is there really controversy anymore about him?
A minor.
Or at least he would big him up, except when he wasn't. But regardless of all the comparisons and whether Gambino liked Drake or not, it was in 2014 when the beef started to develop. And if you ask me, part of the beef has to be related to the questioning of blackness between the two. Because by 2014, Drake's blackness wasn't necessarily questioned as much as it was back in 2009. On the other hand though, Gambino still struggled with the issue. On a 2014 article with Complex, Donald Glover associate Fam Udeorji, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right by the way, he recounted a story where The Weeknd came to Drake's house where Gambino was at to G-check Gambino and his associates. Something that very clearly still irritates Donald Glover. I mean, the guy's from Atlanta and born to 2 black parents, so I get the frustration, man. Especially because Drake wasn't getting asked about his race all the time anymore. Aside from that though, there was still a little bit of competitiveness from Childish Gambino. Because while freestyling at a concert, Gambino would say this.
Niggas think he Drake, nah, I ain't Drake. I sing better, I do better, my shit wetter. My girl tune it up, I gotta get in my tune.
Now of course, Gambino says that every rapper should feel like that, and that he didn't mean anything bad by it. But we know how Drake feels about competitiveness in hip-hop, and Gambino clearly knew.
Have you spoke to them or seen them since?
No.
Nah, not at all?
No, I'm sure they're fine with. That's the thing. Like
He's actually
Kendrick
fine with it.
probably is.
Kendrick is fine
Drake's
with it.
probably sensitive as hell. You know how he does.
Drake is probably not taking it great.
Which is very telling as to what he thought about Drake. The two remained cool and nothing really happened. But something would change around 2018. This Is America was Childish Gambino's biggest hit, and in fact, the Grammy-winning record came as a shock to many of hip-hop fans and people around the world. Back when YouTube and music videos were the key to having a successful song, Childish Gambino used the platform to shock the world in a video that highlighted many of the issues that America was facing then, which are issues that it still faces now. From commentary on racism to gun control, This Is America was the political anthem that you could have guessed it to be, and it was also a Drake diss track.
And it started as a Drake diss, to be honest. It's like, I was like, as like a funny way of like doing it, but then I was like, this shit sounds kind of hard though.
And though Glover did clarify that the full song wasn't an intended shot at Drake, the skeletons of that Drake diss track were still very present. Because the track has a lot of elements that we thought meant something, but when recontextualized with the idea that this was supposed to be a Drake diss track initially, you begin to see things in a new light. Because initially, many people thought the indifference found in the track to be a clear reference to the indifference we have when bad things happen. But when you remember that this was a Drake diss track, it just makes sense in a different way. But to understand what I mean, let's just take a step back into what 2018 was like. Drake was no longer the future of hip-hop, for example. He was the present. The fact was that in the late 2010s, there was no one bigger than Drake, and there was also no genre bigger than hip-hop. As streaming became the powerhouse that it is now, hip-hop became the genre that benefited most from it, and Drake was one of those beneficiaries. In fact, Drake benefited so much from Spotify, people thought he was doing payola. But it wasn't just hip-hop that had changed. It was the whole landscape of music. Music wasn't bubbly anymore, it was darker, it was less upbeat. And if there was somebody who was the face of that, it was Drake. Now that's not to say that Drake sounded like this always, but he did do it a lot. Not just Drake, but hip hop as a whole. And if there was somebody who hated that, it was Childish Gambino.
Yeah, it's because hip hop is changing. It's just like, you know, it's popular music, so people just want a different thing. Like it's just a different thing. Like I just don't feel like, you know, hip hop's not doing the thing it was originally set up to do. So like,
Gambino has been on record saying that he loved when hip hop was unique, when the West sounded like the West and the East sounded like the East and the South like the South. But that was no longer the case. After the mid-2010s, most of hip-hop sounded like Atlanta. And again, if there was somebody who took advantage of that, it was none other than Drizzy Drake. So how better to voice that frustration than by dissing Drake? Get on a beat that isn't poppy and essentially mock Drake, which is how we got This Is America. In other words, This Is America was initially a Drake diss track that represented the monotony of hip-hop. And ironically, after Drake spent over 3 months at #1, it would be none other than Childish Gambino who dethroned him. So did this mean that Gambino and Drake were on bad terms now? Well, not exactly. Season 2, episode 7 of Atlanta would be titled Champagne Poppy, an episode about a party at Drake's mansion, which Drake loved. In fact, he loved the episode so much that he would sample some of the lines on the episode towards the end of In My Feelings. So if they weren't on bad terms and This Is America was technically not a Drake diss, did this mean that the two artists were actually cool now? Well, actually, yeah. In the years after everything had happened, Donald Glover had made a name of himself outside of hip-hop. He really wasn't getting asked about Drake, and Drake wasn't getting asked about Gambino either. It was truly nothing but love, until Childish Gambino revealed that This Is America was initially a Drake diss track. What seemed to be a friendship that seemed to have dated back years was all of a sudden gone. Before long, Drake would hop on stage to say that This Is America was over-awarded and overrated, and by extension Childish Gambino as well. And then we eventually landed at where we are at now, with Childish Gambino seemingly dissing Drake. But honestly, it was always gonna happen this way. In hip-hop, having similar backgrounds can be a good thing, but the constant comparisons will always lead to one thing and one thing only: beef. Sometimes serious and sometimes not that serious. But the truth is that Childish Gambino and Drake were always bound to beef. Anyways, if you want to see another Childish Gambino video about why he retired, should be on the screen. Aside from that, I watched the Olympics thing today. It was kind of disappointing. Paris looks dirty as hell, man. But yeah, shout out to Jay Dilla, shout out to God, shout out to y'all, and shout out to me, man. And yeah.